Hey everyone, Simply Zoological here with a brand new project as promised. But right now, I would like to say welcome or welcome back to the channel depending on if you're new or not. Thank you for watching and I hope you had a great holiday season and a great New Year's depending on whatever holiday you celebrate around this time of year. I would also like to point out that at the time of me recording this voiceover, I am still currently in the process of moving. We actually have our movers coming tomorrow to pick up all of our stuff. But hopefully by the time that you are watching this video, we should be in our brand new house. But anyways, that's enough about that. Let's go ahead and talk about the speed build. So when I first decided to start a new project, which was back in September, August time, I knew I would want it to be a North American taiga zoo. However, I didn't quite know exactly how I wanted it to look, meaning I didn't know architecture style, reference photos, I didn't know any of that. I just kind of knew I wanted it to be in the North American taiga somewhere. But after much deliberation and research, I decided I wanted to use the Akron Zoo entrance because of their tall angled roof that they have as I think it's the front door that they have, where it's really tall and it has like an angle to it, and I really like that aspect. Because being in the taiga, you do tend to get a decent amount of snow. So you want angled roofs so that way the snow doesn't sit on top of your roof and eventually cause it to cave in. So I knew I wanted to use that as reference, but I didn't want to use just the Akron Zoo. I had found another inspiration picture that I wanted to use. So I kind of took the two photos and I meshed them together. So what you're seeing currently is the front entrance, and then the Akron Zoo back entrance, you could say, is what sorry, let me go back. So what you're currently seeing is the front entrance. The entrance into the actual zoo is where I use the Akron Zoo reference. So I do incorporate the Akron Zoo, which I'm very happy with, and I think it turned out amazing. But now let me go ahead and talk about the terraforming. So you might have noticed when we started this episode that the terraforming was already done. And that is because, as most of you know, I hate to terraform just because I'm better at it than I was a year ago, but I'm still not the best at it. And so it took me honestly about an hour to figure out exactly how I wanted the pathing and everything to work. Because several years ago when I watched Sparrow 838's TNS, I loved the idea of her her front entrance path where you walk up the slope and everything. I love that. And so I kind of recreate that in my own way. So you can definitely see some TNS inspiration in this front entrance and just with the foliage too. But when you're building in the North American taiga, you only have so much foliage and everything to use. So you can definitely tell where the inspiration came from and everything. But also you will see, I think it's in next week's video, you will see a fence that she made for her front entrance. I think she used it for like her staff area, the corrugated metal fence that she used. I do recreate that in my own way, so that will be in the next episode. But anyways, enough about that. I want to talk about a little bit about the zoo itself. So as I have said previously, this is a North American taiga zoo, but it's located, I had originally decided to locate it somewhere in the mountains of Colorado, but upon further research, I decided to settle for the Yukon Forest of Alaska for two main reasons, really. The first main reason was because I figured the mountains of Colorado would be a little too cold for some of the animals that we are including, and it would be too much terrain work for my current set of terraforming skills. I don't doubt that I could do it. It's just I think it would cause too much of a headache for my current set of skills that I have terraforming. So maybe we will try that at a later date. But the second reason was because my husband almost got stationed there. So we looked at loads of houses and nature just in Alaska in general. And it was absolutely beautiful all around. So I decided for those two main reasons that we would position this in I'm going to say it's in a national park in the Yukon Forest. So you go to the national park in the Yukon Forest, and somewhere in the national park is Shaded Pines Animal Haven. So that's a little bit about the zoo itself. And I do know that Alaska can get pretty cold, but I'll just make sure to put heaters in backstage areas for the animals that can't necessarily handle the super, super cold climates. But I believe now that we can actually move on to the details of this zoo. So, as most of you have probably seen or can tell, I have yet to use the word zoo in one of my zoos. Because personally, I just prefer animal sanctuaries, animal havens, where the animals are given usually a relatively rough backstory. And I love the idea that you can be a part of helping nature and helping animals to thrive and survive in the wild. Whether they had a hard time originally, they are doing better, and so you can then release them and everything. I love that aspect, and for that reason, I do tend to stick with sanctuaries of some sort. So, anyways, now that that's kind of been settled, I do want to tell you that we do have the overcrowding turned on, which will give us the space requirements that we need for the habitat. And then we also have the land requirement on as well, which will give us the terrain painting, whether they need too much grass, too much soil, all that sort of stuff. We have that turned on as well. And then I do, however, have the plant need turned off because I just think it's incredibly unrealistic for a zoo to cater to the animals' specific biomes depending on where they're from and everything. And so I turn that off in pretty much every zoo that I make. But anyways, now for the sanctuary's backstory, as I am currently struggling with this roof. I do want to stop really quickly, and this roof took me, I would say about an hour to figure out. And just because I knew I wanted it to be angled where, like, the Akron Zoo entrance is, and I struggled so heavily with this roof. But let me go ahead and move on to the backstory of this zoo. So, the story begins with Alaskan conservationist and park ranger Samuel "Sam" Thorne, who spent much of his life exploring the Yukon forest, inspired by its ancient pine forests, crystalline streams, and the majestic creatures that called it home. Sam was deeply troubled by the rising threats of habitat loss and human-wildlife conflict. Determined to make a difference, he envisioned a sanctuary that could both protect vulnerable species and foster public appreciation of the region's unique ecology. In partnership with the national park, local indigenous communities, and wildlife biologists, Sam established Shaded Pines Animal Haven. Its mission was threefold: preservation of taiga wildlife, which includes the haven serves as a refuge for animals displaced by natural disasters, illegal hunting, or climate-related changes such as grizzly bears, timber wolves, moose, and prairie dogs. Cultural collaboration, which is indigenous knowledge, is woven into the haven's educational programs, offering visitors insights into the deep spiritual connection between the First Nations peoples and the Yukon wilderness. And number 3, research and rehabilitation. A team of scientists and caretakers conducts groundbreaking research on taiga ecology while rehabilitating injured animals for release back into the wild whenever possible. The name Shaded Pines reflects on the haven's serene setting within the towering pine forests that dominate the Yukon landscape. These trees, which provide shelter to countless species, symbolize the haven's protective mission. Today, Shaded Pines Animal Haven is a hidden gem for adventurers and conservation enthusiasts, where visitors can explore expansive enclosures that mimic natural habitats, including rocky outcroppings for Dall sheep, dense groves for elusive wolverines, and meadows where elk roam freely. Interactive programs allow guests to learn from rangers, indigenous guides, and wildlife experts while experiencing the raw, untouched majesty of Alaska's wilderness. A cornerstone of the Yukon's commitment to preservation, the haven represents a harmonious blend of preservation and education, inspiring generations to cherish and safeguard one of North America's most pristine and awe-inspiring ecosystems. So, a little bit of a mouthful there, but that is the backstory behind Shaded Pines. So, like I just said, this sanctuary is going to be very heavily story-driven. So, we'll have characters and everything, as you saw. Sam Thorne, that's what I will call him because that's his nickname. And as the story progresses, more characters will be introduced and everything. But I'm really excited with this new year to start this new technique of storytelling in my zoos. As you witnessed with Saguaro Sanctuary that we just finished a couple weeks ago, we did not a full story driven, but all the animals had a backstory. And so this time I'm giving the zoo a backstory as well, which I did that with Shaded Pines as well. But I'm also incorporating characters into this one. So I'm kind of pushing myself in the story realm of storytelling. And I'm really happy I haven't fully finished the story yet, but we are working on it. And as new animals are introduced, the story will progress and everything else. But I am very excited for this new project. I hope you all are as well. And I will see y'all in the next one. We do have, again, very similar to Sparrow's TNS. I know she had this, I think it was like a no, because of COVID and everything, a lot of zoos now have a digital ticket scanner where you can go, if you bought your tickets online, you can go and, I think she just used the ATMs for it, but she covered the ATMs and everything. I didn't do that. I just put the ATMs down and put a wall backing behind it. And I really enjoyed how it came out. So again, the guests can come in if they have bought their tickets online and don't want to interact with people. They can go up and scan their tickets at the ATM and then proceed on to the zoo entrance, which will be downstairs. So as you walk into the building, the zoo entrance, you will take a right or a left depending on if you want to go to the zoo or go to the gift shop. which the gift shop, I believe I have a screenshot of the gift shop at the end of this video, and I am extremely happy with how it turned out because, again, something that I'm also wanting to try and incorporate with this zoo is more signage and more custom signage too, because I know we've had it for a long time. I've just never really done it or used it. I would start to use it and then I would kind of give up on it. So, but with this zoo, I'm wanting to heavily dive into guest education and everything else. So we do have custom education boards and everything that I am still currently working on, but I am extremely happy with how they've come out, and I hope that y'all enjoy them as you see them throughout the zoo. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel, depending on if you're new or not. If you are, then I encourage you to stay all the way through and just hang out with us today. But enough about that, let's go ahead and talk about today's build. Sorry, my dog's in the background. So as you saw in the intro, we are working on our main plaza today, and boy did I struggle with the layout. So that's why we jumped to all the pathing and everything being done, because I probably redid this entrance about 5 or 6 times. But currently we are working on the toilet blocks, and seeing as this sanctuary is in a national park within the Yukon forest, I wanted it to look very national park like in the architecture style of all the backstage buildings and everything. And I think I pulled it off perfectly. For the walls, I used the stained wood panels as per usual, with the European stone as the base. And I believe I used the stained Indonesian pieces for the separation between the wood and the stone. These toilets will be able to just be copied and pasted around the park wherever I need a toilet block. So because I built it all in one group, I think the toilets themselves are not in the same group, but it can still just be copied because it's all grid pieces anyways. And so it will be nice to be able to just take these and just copy them wherever I need them, whenever I need them, and I'm really excited about it. Here you can see I took the Twilight wood pieces. I believe for this zoo in particular, I am using primarily Twilight pieces for wooden structures and all of that stuff, because I know the Indonesian pieces are really good. Don't get me wrong, they're great, but personally, I just love the texture of the Twilight wood better. I think it looks more natural, a little bit more realistic, and a little bit more worn down than the Indonesian wood does. And here I'm just taking the wood pieces, very similar to how you saw in the last video. I am making what you could consider a roof trim. I wouldn't really say it's a trim, but it outlines the overhang of the toilet block roof. And all I do is take the Twilight wood pieces, I rotate them. I have the angle snap. I think it's like 15 degrees as per usual. Most Planet Zoo builders keep their angle snap about 15 just because it's the smallest. And then you just rotate the wood to line up with I think it's one rotation, and then you have to go into the advanced tool and move it down just a little bit, because for whatever reason, the 1 meter roofs are not 15 degree angles, and so the wood doesn't perfectly match up when you rotate it just once. You have to do it like, I think it's like 16 or 17 degrees probably is what I would imagine it being. And then here you can see I'm just adding some support beams underneath, and then I will take vertical wooden panels from the center all the way out to either side of those beams, and then I think after that it will be time to move on to the stroller pickup, or the stroller rental, if you will. Yeah, so here you can see again that random rotation, or not, the angle snap really comes in handy with stuff like this. And you just rotate it once or twice and then turn angle snap off. If you don't know, I believe you can hit the space bar. If you're on PC, you can hit space bar to automatically turn off and on the angle snap. I don't know what it is on controller or PlayStation or anything though, because I am only a PC player, so I do not know all the key binds for PlayStation or anything like that. And then here you can just see, I think I'm trying to group all of this together and just kind of copy it over. And then I add in some, if you saw at the end of last episode, I added in some stone support beams at the base of the vertical wooden panels. And I believe I add some. I can't be too sure if I keep them or not though. So I guess we'll figure out here in a second if I keep them or not. Oh, and then I'm just lowering down all of these wooden beams. Oh, yeah, I do keep them. Okay. And now it is time for this stroller rental that I was telling you about earlier. So for this rental, I use the exact same wooden walls that I did for the toilet block, and same stone, same wood, everything. And seeing as this park will most likely have all sorts of littles running around, I decided to add in a stroller pickup so that way when you're purchasing your tickets, whether you do them online or in person, you will be given the option to add a stroller rental to the ticket. And if so, you can then take that ticket and bring it over to the stroller rental and grab your stroller from the stroller stand. And for the ticket booth, I just used another information sign as per usual. I think it works fine. I wish we had like an actual stroller rental booth thing, but because I think most zoos, sanctuaries, anything like that have a stroller rental or something. And then here, I believe in a second, once I get done with all of the desk and everything, I start work on a garage door sort of thing, if you will. I still, however, have to go in and make the interior walls. I think I'm gonna make them probably plaster or something, just so that way you don't see anything peeking through, because at a later date I go through and add rocks and everything back behind it, so it's not all open as it currently is right now. But yeah, so here in a second we should be adding in the garage door. I can't believe if I mentioned that or not yet, but we will add that, and then shortly it will be time for our staff area. And really quickly, I do want to go ahead and, seeing as we have finished the stroller ticket booth for the majority of the part, I think it is time to go ahead and start talking about our new hires for this week. We have 4 new hires this week, seeing as we now have a full-on backstage area. And so I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to them really quickly. We have Dr. Emily Carter, a wildlife conservation coordinator who joined SPAH after Sam learned of her groundbreaking work on timber wolf recovery. She now leads the sanctuary's conservation efforts, developing successful breeding programs and working on species restoration initiatives. And we also have Sarah Kim and Aspen, the lead veterinarian, and her dog. Sarah was working at a wildlife rehabilitation center in Anchorage when Sam brought an injured grizzly bear cub to her, and impressed by her expertise and dedication, Sam recruited her to oversee the medical care for all animals at SPAH. Her dog, Aspen, has been her companion since her days in Anchorage and now roams the sanctuary alongside her. And then we have Rebecca, or Becca Fields, the educational program manager. Becca was a former teacher with a passion for wildlife, who joined SPAH after attending a conservation event where her creative approach to engaging children impressed Sam. She now leads the sanctuary's educational programs focusing on interactive learning and environmental awareness. And last but not least, we have Tom Harris, the lead facilities manager. Tom, a retired construction worker and longtime volunteer, became involved with SPAH after helping build some of its initial enclosures. His experience and dedication to maintaining the sanctuary's infrastructure make him an integral part of the team. So those are our 4 new hires for this week. It is almost time for me to go ahead and hop out, but really quickly, I do want to say that I absolutely enjoyed building this. However, this staff facility that you are seeing me build currently was a pain because when I started building it, I didn't know exactly how I wanted it to look. I kind of had an idea, but I wasn't too sure. And so I went on Pinterest as per usual, and I found, I believe it was actually a vet building that I saw that I loved, and so I kind of copied it in a way with the angled roofs and everything. So I do go in though and change it from the metal clad. I make my own metal clad, I guess you could say, using the girder pieces. I just turn them and then copy those all the way down, and that's really all we do for this week. And then here you can see I'm taking the little half meter girder piece and using that as like a trim, or you could say like an end cap piece, I guess you could say. And then again, we'll just copy that all the way down and then recolor everything, and we are done with this week's build. Hey everyone, Simply Zoological here, and welcome back to the channel. Either way, thank you for joining me today as we are finally opening up Shaded Pines Animal Haven with the arrival of some prairie dogs who were rescued from a black market smuggling operation. In order to get them in to an exhibit and out of their backstage holding, we have to start with some fencing. So for this fence, I use a Twilight door frame pieces, a glass panel, and then a plaster base to act as a dig-proof barrier for the prairie dogs. And then I do make a second variant that will have just a solid wood pane instead of a glass panel. For this, I double up the Twilight wood and then rotate it to help with any possible patterns or anything. And then I will take the 1x1 meter Twilight wood door panel, I believe, and copy that on itself within the Twilight framing pieces to create this fully enclosed wood panel. And now that both of our variants are finished, we can take them and make our habitat barrier. So I do go in with 2 or 3 viewing areas for the prairie dogs. One right here across from the toilet block. Another one right here where we will have the main viewing gallery. That is, as you enter the sanctuary, you will come in and take a left, and then you will see this main viewing gallery, which will house 2 separate viewing windows in this one gallery. And then we will have the third area, which is more of an implied area right here across from the first viewing gallery that we made, which is right in front of the staff building that we will make here in just a second. Now we are at the staff building, which will be the backstage holding for the prairie dogs. You can see I've already put the walls up, and for that I just used the stained wood as per usual with a metal clad roof. And then I'm going in currently with some plaster pieces to trim off what I will use as a viewing window into the habitat for the staff to be able to do a quick checkup on the prairie dogs. And now we're just going to go in with some quick Twilight door panels as the base to act as a scratch, climb proof sort of thing for the prairie dogs themselves. And then we're gonna go in with the mesh panels, and eventually here in a second we should be doubling them up, I believe, to make the teeny tiny little squares that you can get by doubling them up horizontally and vertically. And now it's time to give everything a quick recolor. We're gonna move the roof up and out of our way so that way we can get the good natural light in so we can see what we're doing. I changed all of the metal pieces to a black, and then the twilight wood comes to another brown. And now we are working on a door that will be able to automatically slide up and down depending on if the zookeepers want to keep the animals in or outside at any point in time. I go in with mesh, but later I go in with some grasslands poles off camera. And then once again, we will add in our hinges for a locking mechanism at the bottom. And then it will be time to move on to some foliage. So here you can see I've already done the terrain painting and added all the enrichments and everything. And we are currently going to go in with some buffalo grass as per usual, where I've painted green to act as the grass base. And then I will go in with some other plants that I have already previously marked for Shaded Pines Animal Haven. You can see the tags that says PBZ. That's because originally I was going to name this zoo Pine Brook Zoo, but I changed it to Shaded Pines Animal Haven, and I just haven't changed the name of the tags, so you can ignore that. But this is a tip that I learned from Sparrow. She did this, I believe, with TNS and maybe even her Sandstone Eco Zoo. But I did this for Shaded Pines, and this is my first time making specific tags for plant palettes, and this has been such a game changer for me to figure out what plants I can and can't use. And you can see at the back, I'm really proud of the rock facade that I've done. I was going to line the entire back with the wood panels for the fences originally, but I ended up changing my mind and using this rock facade that I made to outline the rock work for the main entrance. Hey everyone, Simply Zoological here. Welcome or welcome back. Either way, thank you for joining me again for today's video of Shaded Pines Animal Haven. Seeing as Sam is currently overseeing the move of the bison and pronghorns, we have to get their habitat set up. So we're going to start with a double fence, which is what you can currently see me working on. For this, I wanted a small garden bed in the front of the main fence. So I used the climbable log pieces with random rotation turned on and varied the height to create more interest. And now you can see me going in with the 4-meter log pieces and just measuring out 4 meters in length to create the actual fence itself. And then I'm going to go in with the new Zookeeper cable pieces to create the actual barrier for the bison to stay away from the fence. And then we're going to go in and adjust the length of the log fence barrier, and then we're going to add in some plaster at the base just to have a little bit of a backing for the garden bed area. And then once we get done with this, we're going to copy this all the way down for the bison enclosure and make our fence. So for this habitat, I am really happy with how this came out, seeing as this was my first time building for the American bisons. And I can't wait to show y'all the end result of this habitat. But here you can see me working on the second variation of their fence, where I won't want guests to look through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete all of the cable wires and get the, once again, under the habitat climbing tab, I'm going to use the 4x4 meter log wall panel and just flip that on its side and use that as a full-on barrier so that way the guests cannot look through certain areas of the habitat. And once again, I've already laid out where I wanted the habitat barrier to go, so I just finished that off, and now it's time to work on the actual bison backstage area. For this, I'm using regular stained wood as per usual and plaster on the inside. And then I'll get a plaster wall panel and use that to block off where I want the backstage buildings or holding pins to go. And then I'm going to go in with the stained wood for a porch or deck area, and then I wanted to create a sort of bullpen for the male bull to go in when he's aggressive or anything like that. So I just chose this little corner over right next to the backstage holding area, and we're going to make him a bullpen using the fences that we created previously. And then we're going to take the log panel and close it off, and then add a horizontal log at the top and make some doors here in a second once I get this all situated how I want it. I think I used the 2-meter climbing logs for this. I do need to go in still and make these logs not climbable to save my frame rate a little bit, but I'll worry about that later. And then you can see me currently working on the doors for the bullpen area where the doors can be opened and closed if needed for any reason. The bull or any animal can be put in here away from the rest of the animals or away from the guests if need be. And for these, I just went really simple, plain old square doors that can be opened with a hinge and just they're supposed to act kind of like swinging doors, so they can swing open and closed on a whim. But the staff does have access to be able to lock these if need be. And again, I chose to add a little cross beams within the center of the doors with these thin climbing logs. And then I will copy this door over to the other one and open the doors up. And that's the bullpen complete. And now we have moved on to a porch, I guess you could say pagoda or shade structure sort of thing. It's not necessarily for shade. There's no shade beams or anything over it. It's just open air, but it gives added interest to the building itself. And again, just copying these twilight wood beams all along the length of this porch, and then going to recolor them off camera to kind of match a little bit better with the building. And then once I get done with this, I believe we move on to fencing for the interior. Yes, so here you can see me working on a door. I just grabbed a habitat gate and stuck it down, and then going around with the marquee beams to measure out the size of the door to have an accurate sizing of what the staff can walk through. It's not accessible by any means to the staff from the backstage, but it looks as if the staff could enter and exit as they needed to. So we're just going to take the marquee beams and copy those on themselves. And then I go in with the grasslands pole. I kind of go back and forth with poles for a little bit until I land on the good old trusted grassland pole. This piece is one of the best pieces I think we ever got because it's so thin. It can be used for a number of things. And 9 times out of 10, we don't even use it as a pole. We use it for hot wire or anything else. But it's a great piece and definitely need it in your Planet Zoo arsenal if you are starting out. And now I wanted to, for this fencing, I kind of struggled with the wood that I wanted to use because for bison, since bison are very similar to cattle and buffalo, I searched up cattle pens, cattle pastures on Pinterest, on Google, to kind of figure out how most people keep them. And a lot of wood and metal was involved, I found. So I figured I would just kind of make a simple door with some metal poles and some wood. I wanted to use the Twilight wood, but I ended up having to settle on the classic Planet Zoo wood pieces. And then I've found this new piece that I love to use as a handle recently, instead of using the U-shaped bracket that a lot of people use, because I found that that's too wide for the marquee beams. So for the marquee beams, I've started to use this small gutter piece and just sink it in just enough to where you can barely see it and it can act like a door handle. And then I will make some more variants of that exact door. I make I believe it's like a 2-meter wall panel, and then a 4-meter wall panel, and a 4-meter sliding gate or swinging gate door for the bison to be able to walk in and out of. And I do have PZ Plus, but for realism, I figured a 4-meter gate would be better. Just so that way the bison wouldn't accidentally walk into it and break it or anything like that. So again, just doing the exact same thing as I did with the staff gate. I'm using the classic Planet Zoo wood with grassland poles and marquee beams, and just going to copy all of that down horizontally. And then we will have our gate, or our wall piece, sorry. And then we're gonna, once it's finished, I'm just gonna recolor everything really quickly, and then we will move on to actually putting everything in. So I start with the door, so that way I know where I want the door to go, and then I adjust it accordingly. Seeing as I laid out where I wanted the pins and everything prior to this with the plaster pieces, it was really easy to just kind of throw it down and copy and paste it over. And I really like how this came out. I do wish I could have found another door style, because I feel like this may be a little bit too modern for the style that I was going for. I wanted it to be a little bit more rustic, but I like how it turned out, so I've left it. And here you can see me making a sliding gate with the same door that we created earlier, and just copying marquee beams and everything over. And here in a second, I think our animals should be arriving. So I think now that our animals are actually in and here, it is time for us to start working on their foliage. So let's go ahead and give them some foliage in their habitat. So you can see I started out by painting everything solid soil. The heavy soil, I believe, is what I used. And then I just go in with certain spots and make grass patches as to where I think the grass would grow, or where the staff may not mow or tidy up all that much. And then you can see here I'm adding in buffalo grass, seeing as it is the best grass piece in game. So just adding a load of that, and then I have made it into a group, and I will just copy it and lower it into the habitat. And then we're going to go in with some rocks here and there, just to make little rock piles all around the habitat, just for added interest and for more nooks and crannies for plants to go and hide. Because a lot of plants like to grow in the nooks and crannies of rocks and everything. So we're just adding loads of these, a lot right over here next to the drop off where the patio stops, just to kind of keep the buffalo or the bison and the pronghorn from falling out. I do later go in and add a railing off camera to the actual patio itself, so we don't have to worry too much about their safety. And then going in with, I believe this is the Buddleia, however you want to say that. And then bramble bushes and everything else, using the same tags that I have been using throughout the entirety of this zoo so far. and adding in some ferns and everything else. And I am really happy with how this foliage came out. I think this is probably one of the best foliage palettes I've done, and that I definitely took my time when putting the foliage in this habitat. Because this is supposed to be more of like a meadow or a prairie, I wanted it to feel a little bit more open. And so I do go in here in a little bit and add in some rocks and stuff using the same trick I did with the grass, where I just place it and group a couple of them together. Within that same group, I place rocks all around the habitat where I think rocks should be at. And then I will go in and lower them into the habitat once I have added enough to where my heart is content. Hey everyone, Simply Zoological here. I first want to start by saying welcome or welcome back. Either way, thank you for joining me for today's episode of SPAH. But first, before we continue with the speed build, there's something that I need to go over with you. I am so sorry, but I completely forgot to introduce you to our bison and pronghorn from last week's video. So really quickly, our bison, we have a male whose name is Hickory and two females, Holly and Rose, and they are both expecting here in the next couple of weeks. And then we have three pronghorns, well, four technically. A male, his name is Pistachio, and two females, Cola and Hazel, and then I believe Hazel has had a baby boy who I have named Chestnut. But now that you've met them, let's get back to the speed build. Thank you for watching that, and again, I am sorry for skipping out on their names in last week's video. But anyways, let's get back to today's video. So as you can see, I am currently working on the beaver pool for the backstage area for the beavers specifically. I wanted this pool because if the beavers ever needed to be kept off exhibit for any reason, they would still be able to have that access to water that they need. And then now you can see I am going to work on concreting their floor for their backstage area. And all I do for this is concrete, and then I will go in off camera with the grunge decals as per usual. But here you can see I'm starting to work on plastering their pool because I wanted this entire area to be relatively easy to clean for the staff. I decided to plaster their entire pool so that way the staff could be able to get in, clean it, drain it, all that stuff, and then still be able to refill it after they've cleaned it. So for this pool, I do go in and make two different height levels, you could say, with the plaster because the beavers won't be able to go below the plaster once it's placed. So you can see me connecting the two different levels with this ramp sort of thing. And then we'll just fill this in, and then here shortly we should be starting on their actual ramp to get from the floor to their pool, which is what you can currently see me doing now. So again, for this ramp, same thing, plaster, and then I will cover the sides and everything. And I think I've previously mentioned where I chose a ramp because I rose the water level up. Because one, I hate digging into the ground in Planet Zoo because you can't ever get the terrain to smooth back out like you would want for it to. But now that we've got their pool area done, we can move on to building the actual barn. I did the pool first because I figured it would probably be harder to do than the barn itself, but I was able to get that done and out of the way relatively easy, so that was good. But here you can see for the barn, I'm using the stained wood and plaster on the interior walls and then stained wood on the exterior walls. And right here is where you can see I'm starting to kind of lay out where I would want the viewing window for the moose to be. I don't show me actually building the moose's viewing window because it's the same technique that I've used multiple times in Saguaro Sanctuary. But I do have a cinematic or two of it at the end. And then here you can see this is where I'm working on the door area for the beaver's entrance. And then we are working with the roof. For this roof, I did use the Arctic wood, or the Arctic roof, as the base. And then I chose the metal clad for the actual exterior roofing. Because I liked the Arctic roof support system that it comes with, it was easier to use that than create my own, and it fit this barn perfectly and this zoo perfectly too. But anyways, now we are about to start on the door for the moose's backstage, and you can see over there where the window will be for the moose's viewing area. But for this door, I struggled for probably about, I'd say about between 30 and 45 minutes or so with the door itself, and then probably another 30 minutes just on the colors. Because the reference photo that I was using for this door had a much smaller meshed area than what I have. I tried to almost replicate it one for one, but I couldn't make the door wide enough with that small of a viewing window. Otherwise, the proportions would just look really weird. So I do opt to make the viewing window bigger, but I really like how it turned out. And for this door, I used the marquee beams for the metal support, and then everything inside is the twilight wood. And then obviously the mesh pane for the meshed window area. And because I wanted to use the twilight door framing panels for this X portion, but if you look really closely at the twilight door framing panels, they're rounded on the ends, and I wanted it to be a completely straight panel, so I had to make this door double wide to fix this outbutting that the beams do, I think is what those are, I don't know. And so we have to make the doors wide and everything, but it all turned out really nicely and I love it. And then here you can see I'm working on the fencing for the backstage, or not for the backstage, for the actual habitat itself. And for this fencing, I'm using the exact same fencing that I made for the bison and pronghorn habitat. I will leave that video linked right about now so y'all can go and see how that was built. But if you don't want to, all I did was use the climbing logs, the metal cable wires that we got in the new Zookeepers pack, plaster for the bottom, and then I added more climbing logs for the flower bed and everything. And then we'll move on to the planting. I start with the buffalo grass as the base because you can group it and then sink it all down. That's something that I haven't really done a whole lot. I've just recently started doing it, and it is a game changer on how fast you can place grass because you don't have to place it one at a time and sink it in individually. You can place it all aligned to surfaced and then sink it all down at the same time. However, you can see this bullpen that I literally copied from the bison and pronghorn video. I do keep it in because originally I was going to have a bull in this. It was going to be a bull and a cow, and they were going to have a calf eventually. But I was looking at it after I built it, and I was like, this is just too small a habitat for a bull moose. So I took the bull out, and our story with him is that he is on site but off display. So he's only added to the habitat for breeding purposes, which since our cow currently has a calf, we are going to wait till next breeding season to bring him back in. But so we do keep in the bullpen, but that's the story behind that. And then placing some fog grass, some nettles, some brambles, all that sort of stuff that I have under my shaded pines foliage tag. because that's another thing that I got from Sparrow was that I think it was TNS and maybe SEZ that she did her foliage tags for. I don't know if she still does them. I would assume so, but I'm not sure. But she makes foliage tags for specific zoos, so that way all of her foliage can be under a tag and not out in a plant palette. This is her plant palette under the foliage tab, if that makes any sense whatsoever. Hey everyone, Simply Zoological here, and welcome back to the channel. Either way, thank you for joining me for today's episode of Shaded Pines Animal Haven. So as you can see, we're starting off with some simple terrain work for this habitat because I wanted a small river that would run through the entirety of this exhibit itself. But I also wanted different terrain elevations within the habitat besides just the river. So you can also see me working on raising some terrain, lowering some terrain all around just to help with keeping the eye interested in the habitat as guests are looking at it because of how large it is for the foxes. One of the main reason that it is so large for these foxes is because originally I was going to house I think 3 different nocturnal species in this area, but I quickly decided against it. Now you can see that we are working on the fencing for this habitat. And for this fencing, I used the twilight beams, the twilight door panels, the twilight door frame, mesh, the European cable, and hinges. So again, all very simple pieces. I used the mesh as the viewing window, you could say, and then I used the twilight door frame pieces to add just what you could consider an attachment from the mesh to the wood itself. And then I will take the hinges and add those to the top because when I was doing my research for fox fencing, I found that foxes can jump relatively high. So they need pretty high fences in order to keep them from escaping. So for this, I use the trick that most Planet Zoo players use with the hinge piece or any other small piece and the cable, the small European cable. I think it's the signpost cable. I don't know. It's that piece that you saw right there. And I just use that to, again, use as a jump-proof barrier sort of thing. And then we do make a second variant, which you can see currently, that has no mesh and it's just a completely solid piece. Because I didn't want the entire habitat to be viewable in certain areas. I wanted 2 different viewing windows, one right across from the moose and the beaver viewing windows, and then the second one over to the left, or to the right, across from the bison and pronghorn exhibit. And then you can see here I added in the water effects and rock work off camera. I just got to building and completely forgot to record, so I just did a quick little shortcut of how it turned out and everything, and I really love how the river turned out. That was my first time doing a river in game so far, and I am absolutely very pleased with myself for that. But here you can see that I am working on the backstage area for the foxes. And I struggled with this so hard. I don't know that I have ever struggled with a building this hard in my entire Planet Zoo career. Because as you saw in the beginning of this video, if you were paying attention, this backstage building was the plain stained wood, as per usual with the rest of the backstage buildings in this zoo so far. And I was looking at it and it was just too flat. I didn't like it. I hated how it looked. So I went to Discord and I messaged, I said, hey, I need some help. And I believe it was Sori who gave the idea of doing a log cabin facade. So the front looks like a log cabin, but the sides and the back are the stained wood. And so I played around with that a little bit, and I am so glad that I did, because I love how this turned out. This was my second time building a log cabin, first time on camera, and I am very pleased with myself and my ability to be able to make this look good. Because you can see I kind of struggled a little bit with the spacing between the log pieces, but I just went in and adjusted them off camera and it turned out perfectly fine. And then here you can see I'm working on a custom roof, because with the way that I made this building, I made it smaller than it technically probably should be. And I couldn't, because if you know Planet Zoo, you know that the on-grid pieces you can only move in as small as 1 meter increments, but as large as 4 meters. And because I used off-grid pieces for the building, it made it a little bit more difficult to make a regular roof or use grid pieces for the roof. So I made a custom roof with the metal girders, and I love how that turned out as well. And then here you can see that we are onto the rock work, and we will soon be moving on to the foliage. And with that being said, I want to go ahead and introduce you to our foxes. So we have a pair of red foxes. We have Ember and Ash. Ash is the male, Ember is the female, who were longtime residents of the forest surrounding Shaded Pines Animal Haven. When the flames tore through their territory, the pair was forced to flee, narrowly escaping with singed fur and minor burns. Disoriented and struggling to find food in the scorched landscape, they were eventually spotted near the sanctuary's perimeter, weak and in need of help. Recognizing their distress, the SPAH team set up humane traps to safely bring them in for medical care. And while their injuries were treatable, the fire had destroyed their home range, leaving them with no safe place to return. With no other options, Sam and the team decided to offer them a permanent home here at the sanctuary, where they could live safely while also educating visitors about the challenges wildlife face due to natural disasters. Hey everyone, Simply It's Logical here, and welcome back to the channel. But either way, I'm glad you could join me for today's episode of Shaded Pines Animal Haven. So as I'm sure you probably heard in the intro, we have a pair of armadillos that are in need of a home. So that's what we're going to be working on today. However, if you saw the last episode of SPAH, you may know that I wanted to build a house for them and 2 other species, being the raccoon and the skunk. But don't get your hopes up, because the raccoon and skunk will be coming in the next episode. But for right now, let's talk about what we're doing today. So as you can see, I'm currently working on the walls for the exterior of the building. And for these walls, I used the stained wood, the Indonesian brick, some twilight wood beams for the edging or the molding around the walls, and then also the Indonesian trim piece around the Indonesian brick area. And I did struggle a bit with how I wanted these walls to look. I think this is probably the 3rd or the 4th rendition with these walls, but once I was happy with them, I added them all around the exterior. And then once I was done with the walls, I started to work on the roof. And for the roof, I wanted it to be more of a layered roof, so I wanted like taller portions and then shorter portions, which is what you can see currently. The taller portion, because I wanted to have skylights for on the higher roof areas. And then for the flat roof part, I just used the plastic pieces or the art pieces to create the flat roof. But for this, you can see I'm using the twilight wood and just going around the entirety of where I wanted the taller roof to be. And then I will go in off camera with the shutters and turn them horizontally to make them act as vents. And then I also go in with some conservation wood and marquee beams to act as edging around the twilight wood piece. And then I use more plastic pieces for the edging around the skylights. So here you can see I'm working on the skylights that we will have all over the top of this roof. And for this, I just used the 4x2 meter glass panel, and then I added the marquee beams all around each of the sides. And then I just copied them over into a checkerboard pattern. And then I took 4 of the skylights and angled them upwards, which you can see me currently working on, because I wanted more height, and 2, I wanted a bit more detail. So I just took a couple of them and angled them upwards, so that way it could, 1, add more ventilation, and 2, it just, I like the idea of it. So for this, I used the bracket piece, the chain link. I think it's the one that we got in the Twilight pack. I'm not 100% sure. You'll see it here in a minute. I used the chain link, and then I used hinges to act as if these skylights can be opened and closed. I do need to go in though and add the hinges to all of the rest of the ones that are closed, just to continue to add that little bit of realism as if all of them could be opened if need be. And then once I was happy with one side of the support, I added it to the other side, and then I just copied the skylight downwards to make it match up with the bracket at the bottom. And then here you can see we're now working on the door, and I do want to apologize that you can see the flooring has been finished. I didn't struggle with the flooring, but it took me a long time and I just forgot to record it. But you'll see it close up later. But for the door, I struggled with how I wanted the door, because I debated on whether I wanted to build my own door or whether I wanted to use the glass doors. And as you can see, I settled for the glass doors. But for the door frame, I used the metal beams that we got in the Australian pack or the Outback pack or whatever it was. And then I saw in Sparrow's desert house, for her doors, she added these vents at the above the door to act as ventilation, and I like that idea, so that's what I did here as well. And then I will, once I get all of the beams in, you can see I've added more of a support, because originally I was thinking about maybe doing like a sliding glass door, but I decided against that too. And so I kind of took my idea that I had for the sliding glass door and used it here, with the beams being the 2 beams that I doubled up next to the Twilight wood beams, is kind of what I was doing there. And then you can see I added a glass panel, and that was the doors done. And we do end up having 2 doors. The other one you can see at the far end of this hallway right here. But now it's on to the armadillo habitat. So for this, because the armadillos are relatively small, I wanted to raise their terrain up so that way the guests could get like be within eyesight of of the armadillos as they're walking around their exhibit. So I did do all of that off camera because it took me a long time to get the terrain work correct. But you can see here that now that I've added in all of the enrichment items, I am working on what will be the viewing areas for the armadillos. And I do use the Indonesian brick and then the twilight wood pieces to create the viewing windows. However, I'm still debating on whether I may go in and change the Indonesian brick for another piece of some sort. Probably once I finish the entirety of the interior, I'll probably get a better sense of what pieces I actually want for the inside of this building. But here you can see I'm working with that twilight wood plank and copying that all the way around. However, I do go in here in a bit and delete a lot of them because I copy the Indonesian brick upwards to have the brick at the top and the bottom of the viewing window. And then I decided that I wanted the corners and the edges to be solid brick. So I create true windows viewing into the habitat. Here you can see I'm doing what I had just said about with the Indonesian brick, and then I'll take it and copy it downwards to add more angles and more windows. And now you can see that we have moved on to the interior of the armadillo exhibit. So you can see that the windows are done and everything. And now I am working on the back facade for the armadillo exhibit because I knew when I started this habitat that I wanted the back wall to be mud walls basically. And for these I made my own. I have it all in one group. However, I may probably go in off camera and group it individually to have different sections and stuff so I can use it for more builds and stuff like that later on. But for these mud walls I used the desert rock, the faux roots, the tree trunk roots, and stalactites, and then the liana vines, I believe, the tangled ones. And then I go in with some buffalo grass and coastal pig face to act as weeds growing out of the rocks, or faux weeds, I guess you could say. Because I started with this door area because I wanted to make sure that the armadillos could get in and out of their backstage area, I guess you could say, before I completely covered the rest of their backstage in rocks and everything. I had to make sure they could get in and out. And then here you can see I'm adding in the grass pieces all over, and then here in a second I will add in the coastal pig face as well. And then here you can see we've had a big cut to the roof is now off so I can see better, and a big majority of the wall is now done. So I'll just kind of finish this off and then it will be time to add plants and everything. And now it's time for the planting. So I start with the desert rocks to add more texture to the bottom, because as you can see, I have taken the cladding desert rocks to act as the flooring to make the complete flooring flat. And then I'll go in with these faux rocks recolored to the desert rock color and add those in, and then I'll go in with some mulch here and there to make planting areas so I can add plants and stuff in as well. And for the plants, I just use the basics that are normally in the zoo: ferns, bracken, arrowhead bushes, bramble bushes, all that sort of stuff. Hey y'all, Simply It's Logical here, and welcome back to the channel. But either way, thank y'all for joining me for today's episode of Shaded Pines Animal Haven. Now, as I'm sure most of y'all are aware, today we are building an exhibit for the raccoons and the skunks. Now, originally, these guys were supposed to be housed separately, but ultimately I decided to house them together, seeing as I couldn't find a big enough area for the raccoon's pool, but more about that later. For right now, let's talk about the build. So for this fence, I used the metal beams from the Australian pack for the frame, and then I added the mesh pieces for the interior of the frame, I guess you could say. And then I'm just going to take this and place it all the way around the entirety of this exhibit that I'm planning out for these guys. And I do want to note really quickly that my mouse is still kind of messed up. So I have cut out a couple different parts that maybe my mouse misclicked a couple times and everything. I'm just going to have to get a new mouse, I guess. But here you can see the entire fence is done, and now it's time for the pool. So for this, you can see I'm using the 1x1 meter plaster piece for the rim, and then the 1x4 meter piece for the actual pool portion. And then I'm going to take all 4 pieces and do the circle trick where you copy them all the way around the entirety of the pool area, and then gonna go in and group all of them together and get them into position, and then it'll be time to do a quick recolor. I do settle on this light gray tone because I wanted it to look like concrete, but I also wanted it to look, I didn't want it to stand out too much in the exhibit. And then here you can see I'm adding in some 4x4 meter pieces for the base of the pool because I didn't want the pool to be too deep. I just wanted it to be shallow enough for them to walk through and kind of get their feet wet a little bit. And then you can see here, I'm kind of just trying to decide what drain I want to use. I do ultimately settle with this squared one, and now it's time to work on the gates. Now, for these gates, I copied the ones from the beaver and moose exhibit that we built a couple weeks ago. So if you haven't checked that video out, I'll leave a link to that right about now in the video. But I'm just going to take those gates and put them into place, and then I'm going to take the plaster walls and fill in the entirety of the empty space, you could say, with different variations of sizes of plaster walls and everything. And then I'm just going to take this exact wall and double it up on itself to make it look seamless. And now it's time to work on the fencing for the interior of the habitat. And again, for this, I used basically the same styled fencing that I used for the night house in Saguaro Sanctuary. So I will leave the link to that tour video down in the comments below. Or right about now in the video, sorry. But we're just going to take the Indonesian brick, recolor it to the color that I find suitable for this build, and then raise the pillars up and kind of place certain, I believe I raised them up two bricks, height-wise, above the fence panel. And then I'm gonna take these pillars, and I'm kind of picky about where I want them positioned. So I do go in and kind of mess with them a little bit, but here you can see I've gotten them all done. And now it's time to work on the climbing frame. And for this climbing frame, I found a reference photo of a climbing frame, sort of, for domestic cats. So all it is these big, like, Y-shaped pillars holding a long horizontal pole, and then these, like, steps up to the long pole. So that's basically what I did here. I do go in and add some more supports. You can see me doing that here with the thin climbable pieces. And then I'll copy these two and copy them around to make 4 supporting points. And then I'm going to take this whole piece and copy this into place in the different areas that I have all of these steps currently. And then once I delete all of the old steps, I will take a quick rope piece, like a tie down piece you can see here, and just put that on all of the ugliness of where all the poles join up. And now we are working on another climbing frame sort of thing. And for this, I wanted like a house sort of thing that the raccoons technically should be able to go in and sleep at. But because this is Planet Zoo and the hitboxes are crazy big, even though I have PZ Plus, it's not perfect. And so the raccoons cannot use this, but they do climb on it quite often. But here you can see I'm just taking the climbable pieces and adding in some supports. And then I'll take these, raise them up to match the bridge supports. And then I will take the climbable, I don't even know what the squared pieces are that I used. Like climbable panels, I guess you could call them. I don't know. But take those and copy those all around the base of this shelter area and use this for the house that I was talking about. I do end up bringing this and like extending it so it's like a double length. It's the entire length of this thing, I guess you could say, and taking some thicker climbing logs and kind of fixing it up a little bit. I do really like how this turned out, but I do wish the raccoons could also use it, and I do know that I can go in and play around with the sizing requirements since I have PZ Plus, but I'm just too lazy, honestly. And now it's on to some foliage work. So we're going to start off with the buffalo grass as per usual, and you can see here I've kind of already laid out where I want all of the grass and everything to be. And you can see that I have added in some more climbing frames outside. I do add like this catwalk wall off camera, and then I take that house that we just got done building and copy that outside too. So they do have some climbing outside, so that's good. But here you can see I'm taking buffalo grass to add for the foliage, and then we'll sink that down. And then let me see if I can get this right. All of the foliage that I've used for this habitat, which is the exact same as all my other builds, which consists of buffalo grass, arrowwood bushes, bracken, tree stumps, boudelea, I think is how you say it, lady ferns, a few holly trees here and there, the small baby ones, some diamond leaf willow bushes, and some nettles.